Hey, what's up, family? Today's podcast from a poverty scholar, reporting to you live and direct from this stolen, small, liberated piece of Mama Earth us poor folks call homefulness. That's a homeless people's solution to homelessness in Deep East Wichin, that's Oakland. Yeah, the war on the poor is in full effect, from Frisco to Oakland to the Philippines and Iraq. But now the soldiers are social workers and politricksters creating deadly legislations and contracts. Yeah, today's podcast from a poverty scholar is dedicated to trying to unconfuse the crumbs that the politricksters and the non-profiteers dole out for us poor peoples, the hellfare and the meta-hell and the EB, not really food, tea, and all the other ways in which, we supposedly, us poor people, survive, and not really, in this stolen indigenous territory called amerikkklan. So today's podcast from Poverty Scholar is focusing specifically on the trumpikklan and ben-carson's so-called proposals to raise the rent in public housing for poor people, and also trumpikklan's thing about raising the work requirement for poor families, poor mamas and daddies on welfare. First of all, I need to break down the specific lie around the housing piece for folks who don't already know. One of my things I've been saying from the beginning of the trumpikklan presidency, quote unquote, is that this is just neoliberal policies that were already put in place by the previous demikans being instituted and implemented. So you need to understand that. In 2013, myself and Queen Nande Extraba from Poor Magazine released the original. Nobody else was talking about it. So yeah, I'm going to say exclusive. Ain't trying to pop our collar, but honestly, it was more like nobody else was actually speaking on it. Even when we tried to get even so-called independent media, the only other folks who were listening was the San Francisco Bayview. Shout out to our comrades at the San Francisco Bayview, baddest black newspaper in the nation, about this benevolent HUD title called RAD, that's Rental Assistance Demonstration, which really just is code for privatizing all public housing. So I did say all public housing, and it was implemented real quietly under the, so-called whatever, I don't know what, progressive or whatever they were calling Obama's administration, leadership of Obama and Obamita Julian Castro, who was the head of HUD, which was, the big idea, which was to privatize all public housing, because that was already in the works. So then going back a little bit, for those of you who don't already know, and I'm sure many of my listeners and folks know, the welfare codes that was originally coming out of the New Deal, first of all, were raced and classed. They were originally set up for white widows of war veterans, and it was actually named in the New Deal. And so anyone outside of that framework was considered aberrant. So single mamas, peoples of color, divorcees, quote unquote, were all ineligible for those crumbs. And so we were considered undeserving poor versus the deserving poor. Fast forward to the 60s, and you had Demican Daniel Moynihan going into black housing projects in Harlem, and with one stroke of his white pen, essentially further pathologizing single mother-headed households that were black single mother-headed and powerful and beautiful and already practicing, as Dr. Nobles teaches us in the Mother's issue of Poor Magazine, actually having a lot of agency and already practicing the deep structure of matriarchal family systems. But anyway, he goes in and immediately criminalizes and pathologizes these single mother-headed households as broken and not working. And when he did that, he wrote the welfare code, which actually led to things like people having to lie about being married and having to lie about any kind of relationships they had, and and this further deepened the deep racism and classism, which are clearly fused in amerikkklan, that rules over the welfare system today. Under Bush, they were even further strangely strengthened with the idea that if we all got married, we'll all be good. I bring all those up to say that all of the housing and the medical care, Medi-Cal and Medicaid and those systems and food stamps are all come under the rubric of that, so-called health welfare system and not code, which of course all of you know it makes up a tiny amount of the federal budget, literally an ounce of it already. But what started in the 70s and can be witnessed by going to www.raphome, that's our comrades at Western Regional Advocacy Project, so that's WRAPHOME.org, was a slow bleed on the housing subsidies that us poor people barely get if we're lucky enough. And it was started way back in the 70s and 80s, and it was already determined that way back when that eventually there would hardly be any housing subsidies at all. They didn't name things like we have today, but they clearly named, as you can see in RAP's extensive poverty scholar-led reports, that it was all laid out already under neoliberal hypocrisy of so-called Demicans, as I call them, or Dr. Chinosole, one of Poor Magazine's sheroes, Ibaye, taught my mom and me the Demicans and the Republicrats. But anyway, so that said, at that time, and moving forward to the 90s with the lie of Hope 6, which all of us poor people called No Hope, there was a slow bleed on public housing, and it ended up becoming a complete demolition and dismantlement project that was actually clearly instituted under Obama, and actually was named, again on these benevolent titles that mean nothing, as RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration. Now this is where it got really twisted, because this is when it started to include the non-profiteers and the people who supposedly are there to help us poor people. And I say that because at the time when RAD was revealed in 2013, Poor Magazine family were in a meeting, a so-called public meeting, which wasn't at all public, which we were secret, we got a secret memo that wasn't meant to go to us. And we showed up at this so-called public meeting that wasn't public. And there were a whole cadre of non-profiteers who were there, who were the helping agencies, the savior agencies, there to set up, to give us things like housing assistance, what I would call anti-social work, case manglement, and quote-unquote service provision. These are the people who actually we go to when we get eviction notices, and we go to when we're struggling with our welfare or our medical care or our housing. They were in the room in this not public meeting. And I was actually, again, clearly not invited. And when they saw me, let's just say, me and another Poor Magazine family member, they were not happy. But at that moment, in that time, the city of San Francisco was one of 5 demonstration cities. Demonstration is a demo that oftentimes these politricksters come up with, so it's like a grant so that they can try out the poison. It's kind of like a drug deal, giving you a little taste, and see if you get excited or get hooked or die, one or the other. So it was 5 cities, and San Francisco was one of them. And Mayor Ed Lee embraced it with love and respect and had it be part of their 10-year homelessness plan, or basically how to cause more homelessness, but that's not what it was called. And at that time, I stood up in front of, all these non-profiteers and politricksters in their so-called public comment, which wasn't really public, and asked the question, can you guarantee there will be housing for very low income or no income people in this RAD program? And at that point, I didn't even know what it was, except that I knew that it was something that was going to, quote, fix the broken public housing program. And they were talking back and forth in code, and it wasn't clear to me. And I got this 39-page report that I tried to sift through really quickly. And then there was this fake, not public comment where I asked this question of the board. And at that moment, one of the public housing commissioners, who seemed to actually be trying to walk in integrity, said, quote, RAD is an integrated model that preserves affordable housing. And so then again I asked, what does that mean, right? And you're not answering my question. Is the RAD program guaranteeing that there will be housing for very, very low income or no income people like myself and my family? And at that moment, again, this commissioner looked back and basically said, no. Now, I appreciate them for telling the truth. Now, going back to what is RAD. So RAD is a benevolent title for what I actually call eradication, because it's actually getting rid of public housing in the clearest sense. What it does is sell the mortgages of all the public housing units across the U.S. on the private stock market to the same banksters that caused the foreclosure crisis of 2008, AIG and Citigroup and Wells Fargo and all of those, Bank of Apartheid, all then buy, and some other really big corporations, as Mama Viv says, buy these mortgages and then dole them out to private, non-profit corporations. And again, for those of you who don't know about non-profits, they actually have to operate almost exactly the same as for-profit corporations in terms of sort of a corporate structure. That's why you have all these grant pimps. That's why you have what I call philanthropimps. And that's why you have all these boards that are almost might as well be for-profit boards ruling over them. So anyway, the RAD program sold all the leases to the public housing in San Francisco, and then sold them back, if you will, or had them leased or controlled by these nonprofit and sometimes for-profit developers, as I affectionately call them. Yes, I did say developers. Welcome to Mama Tiny's glossary. One colonizer word at a time. But anyway, all that to say, San Francisco since then has seen a slow bleed on all of our public housing. One of our sister comrades and co-author in a lot of this work, Quinandi Ekshaba, and myself have been reporting all the way through. Every time we tried to get other people to pick up this story, it was barely picked up. The only other media that did pick up stories about it was Truth Out, and I think Alternate at the time did some media about it, but it was actually a scandal. It is a scandal. So now fast forward to, for instance, Quinandi's public housing project, which at the time when we were fighting to get this story out, the non-profiteer who was going to be getting money out of the RAD program, which I will explain in a second, fought me on social media, claiming that, in fact, we were wrong and we were stating something that wasn't true, even though we had filed all these FOIAs, Freedom of Information Act requests, to prove that, in fact, everything we said was true, and said, oh, no, there is no, that building, which is in the Philnelmo section, actually called the Philmo, but we say Philnelmo because there's slowly but surely snowing, a snowstorm in the Fillmore, if you get my drift, literally and figuratively, all puns intended, and it's nothing but mostly white hipsters now and hardly any housing for poor people, with all kinds of Mickey Mouse reasons and ways they're getting us out of there. But anyway, they said, oh no, this big group of units is not going to RAD. It's not going at all. And of course, in the end, as we speak now, it's completely RAD-ified. Mama Nandi has not had her appliances fixed in a year and a half. There's a slow bleed to get rid of folks. We fought for Sabrina Taylor's family to not be evicted because the first thing they did is to criminalize all the young men of color under the one strike rule and even beyond, because it's way deeper than one strike with these private nonprofits, because under a regular private nonprofit, they basically have an arbitrary ability to kick out whoever they want and an impossible set of hoops to try to get back in. So again, if you don't understand what the specifics of RAD are, you can look it up under Rental Assistance Demonstration. You can look up the series of articles that Poor Magazine did on the Bayview and on our poormagazine.org. The first piece was called RAD, Public Housing Privatization, Stealing Our Last Acre and Our One Remaining Mule. Because at the time, one of the clear things that was going to happen is that they were saying that every single public housing unit that had formally had a mandate to house the poorest among us, in other words, even if we don't have money, we get housing, was now going to be flipped to, quote, mixed income housing. Because one of the many lies around this was that us poor people shouldn't congregate. And that when we congregate, like rats in a maze, we cause violence and cause, other evils related to poverty. And so the way to, fix up and clean up the projects, again, using hygienic metaphors about poor people, and poor people of color, was to break us up and have less of us in a place. And so, again, let's take that all the way to the end. What does that mean? That means that at least 50 to 70% of the very poor families who were living in public housing are now unhoused people, both families and elders and disabled communities. So I want to make a through line, because in the case of Sabrina Taylor and her family, which Poor Magazine fought for, we literally went to the mayor's office, we struggled, there's a video on Poor News Network fighting for our life. They were evicted. Their family was scattered to the wind. And what happens when us poor peoples are evicted? We don't go to some cutesy little cloud You know, we don't disappear. And like my mama said, we don't necessarily leave the hood at all. We just move into the sidewalk motels. So let's get real about the post-gentrification impact on our poor bodies and our poor bodies of color. So all that to say, fast forward 5 years, and we're living with RAD. We had the blessing of speaking with comrades from the People's Institute for Housing Justice in Chicago, and they told us that the movement to get rid of public housing there is almost up to 95%. These huge units are being demolished at the rate of, several per year. And then our favorite, yes, wait for it, the developers come in and create these, quote, mixed income housing. Now, many of you might be saying, well, public housing was bad. So first of all, that's a poison cocktail that was set up from the get-up. One of the things that happened right before RAD got instituted was they made sure that the managers at the head of RAD were always oddly caught in a scandal. Like if you look back in the, not the head of RAD, sorry, the head of Housing Authority in different cities. So isn't it odd that in almost every city from 2011 to 2012, there were so many public housing or housing authority EDs and managers that got caught in a scandal. In San Francisco, we had literally one after the other who were caught stealing money from the budget and removed. So that was one of the things, right? And so that things never got done. Well, it's interesting if you leach a program down to nothing, never properly support it, create a lot of racist and classist policies to make sure to criminalize the people who so-called benefit from it, it's probably going to fail. That's kind of a mathematical equation, right? And that's what happened. So they had a poison cocktail of every single public housing authority agency somehow being rife with scandal and or running out of money, which mostly actually was what happened, so that they could come in like the knights on white horses with this new plan, which wasn't new, to dismantle public housing. So now fast forward to Ben-Carson and Trumpikklan. He comes out with, we're going to raise the rent by 30 to 50% on all public housing residents. Well, first of all, there's hardly any more public housing as we know it, number one, in the whole nation. Number two, if you also check with our comrades at RAP, there already is a plan that's clearly stated that was created under Clinton and before to get rid of Section 8, to cut the Section 8 voucher down to so little that it wouldn't mean anything, and to leach the housing budget down to so little that it wouldn't support the units at all. So what people don't understand right now and what the confusion is behind Trumpikklan is that this is just the Republicrats, and specifically the hatchet men, the bizarre Klan members, and their black friends in the white people's house, trying to claim ownership for something that was actually already completely in the pipeline. So I just want to clear people's confusion behind the politricks here, because it really gets confusing, right? And it really gets almost it's almost so confusing that you can't get through it. And I just want you to clear that up as we move into this brutality and this violence of state-sponsored gentrification, which has already been in the pipeline, literally, almost for 40 years, and clearly since the late 90s with No Hope 6, and then finalized with RAD in 2013. So when we talk about the complete, horror of raising public housing, I do want to be really clear. Do your research. That's poor people-led research. Learn the neoliberal hypocrisy, that hypocrisy, as I call it, that was already in the pipeline, and understand that these bizarre Klan members are just the hatchet men. There's nothing new about this. And for those of you who have Section 8 vouchers, please do not take that piece of paper, if they're offering it to you now, to get you out of public housing. So these are the things that you can actually do. You can say no to the public housing voucher. You can collectively organize with your fellow public housing tenants, like they did in North Carolina, because they actually resisted RAD. You have a voice, family, by collectivizing as tenants and saying, hell no, we will not let you ratify us. And so there's a few buildings that have actually collectively come together for collective tenant ownership. And you can do the research and find out the real story behind this. And the other piece, putting this out to conscious lawyers that we've been screaming about since 2013, help us create a class action suit that sues for poor people's equity from these public housing projects that folks have lived in for generations, and stop lying specifically about black people and indigenous people's equity in this stolen territory that was built on the backs of black people's and indigenous people's land and lives. So I'm giving you direct and immediate answers of things that you can do. If you want more information on this, which we have a whole body of, if you're thinking about fighting it, please do. If you're currently fighting a RAD situation in your building, don't stay silent. Don't just say yes. Don't accept their BS letters about, there's going to be a demolition. And whatever you do, don't move to a motel for 3 months while they, quote, rehab your unit, because you will not get your unit back 99% of the time unless, like we did in San Francisco, you kick up a big storm, and so they're afraid of you. This is one of the things that Poor Magazine's on this earth to do. So we are down to support you wherever you are in this stolen nation. You can email us at poormag@gmail.com for more information on this. As well, if you're a conscious member or a person with resources, a lawyer, etc., would be interested in taking this up as a class action suit. It's a national suit. You can email us at poormag@gmail.com. And if you're a conscious person with resources who's thinking about helping with community reparations, the other thing that we're doing is helping folks to build homefulness, which is a homeless people's solution to homelessness, in abandoned or purchased pieces of Mother Earth, so that we can move off these politrickster lies and these crumbs which have never supported us in a scarcity model that says that we don't have enough, when we all know that we have plenty to support each other. You can also learn more about that by emailing us or coming to the next session of People School, which will be in Black August 25th and 26th on the liberated Ohlone Lishan land in Deep East Wichin, Oakland, this year. And last but not least, our next Stolen Land Hoarded Resources tour will be October 14th. So again, stay woke, or wake up, because sadly, many of us are not even looking out of our sheets because we're so scared by this poison of lies and hypocrisy that continues to make more confusion. But really, seriously, step up, because this is a very serious thing. And when these politricksters release these ridiculous messages about, raising the public housing rent, don't be fooled. Don't get all behind, that's bad, and post it on FaceCrack and think that you've done something. You haven't done anything, and what needs to happen is you need to connect the dots. Much love to all of our listeners. That's today's podcast from a poverty scholar, because the war on the poor is in full effect from Frisco to Oakland to the Philippines and Iraq. And we can fight back.